Good evening, Hong Kong and our friends from around the world. I would like to welcome you all to the sixth in our Optimizing Dancer Potential webinar series. This series invites dance industry professionals to share their knowledge and experience of working to improve the performance, health, well-being, and creativity of dancers. Tonight, I'm particularly excited to introduce my friend and colleague, Erin Sanchez, who will be joining us tonight or her morning from the UK. Erin is an advocate, and I think that's really important, an advocate, an educator, and works with the dance community to develop applied research focusing on improving dancer health and well-being. She collaborates to improve dancers' health and well-being and performance with OneDance UK and the National Institute of Dance Medicine and Science, or NIDMS, by developing resources and advocating for safe dance practice, health and well-being standards, as well as interventions delivered to governments, employers, and stakeholders. Erin's going to share with us tonight a little bit about the work that she does advocating for dancers' health and wellness. Erin, it's such a huge honor to have you with us tonight.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm delighted. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Great. I would like to start with maybe you telling us a little bit about yourself and your career in dance and how you got to be a dance educator, advocate, pioneer really for health and wellness in dance.
Yeah, I don't know that I can hold that mantle of that title that you've given me, but I'll tell you a little bit about how I got to where I am. How about we do that? So I started out as a training dancer. I was born in the United States in a place called Albuquerque in New Mexico. I first studied ballet as a young person and then moved into contemporary dance. I had a passion for movement and the body. For me, movement was always like meditation. It felt very kind of internal and sort of holistic to me. I was also really lucky to have a ballet teacher who was very, very interested in somatic practice and the body. And so I very much, right at the very beginning and all through my dance training, knew about the body, knew about somatic practice, knew about the brain-body connection and kind of using my body in a very kind of internally felt way. And that was very important for me. I had a very brief professional experience, but I moved away from professional dancing as a result of something that happened in my life that was sort of unexpected. But I thankfully was really, really lucky to find dance science. And I came to the UK to study dance science for a master's degree at Trinity Laban. And while I was at Trinity Laban, I was introduced to the work of Dance UK and Helen Laws. She was working in the Healthier Dancer program. I did an internship in the Healthier Dancer program starting in 2010. And because of my passion for that work, I sort of found a way to do as much as I could for them as an intern, and eventually that turned into a job. That job led to working with several other organizations. So I've worked with the Rudolf Nureyev Foundation. They had a medical website which was international. It provided dance medicine and science resources for different dancers across the world. And I worked with them for about 7 years. I also worked with the ballet competition, the Prix de Lausanne, as a part of or kind of following on from my experiences with the Rudolf Nureyev Foundation. I have also worked now with the National Institute of Dance Medicine and Science for about sort of 7 years. I am now the manager of that National Institute, but I've only been doing that job for about 1.5 years. And alongside those roles, I've also worked with Safe in Dance International, which is an organization that provides information about dancers' kind of health and well-being education, and several other organizations. And I think I became an advocate because I feel very, very passionately that we can have healthy dancers who perform well. And I'm not going to say too much more about that because I know we'll talk a lot more about that later on, but I'm deeply passionate about that. And I hope that comes across in everything that I do. Advocacy as a word is about being sort of a voice for people who may not have a voice or may not feel like they have a voice. And so I take that job really seriously to make sure that I try to do my best to understand what those in dance, and I mean everyone in dance, not just dancers or students, but teachers, choreographers, professionals in every sense, so managers, producers, people who teach, people who educate in different ways, people who work alongside dancers, all of those people deserve to be healthy and well. And sometimes they're so busy making art or doing their jobs that they don't have time to ask for the things that they need to be healthy and well. So that's why I became an advocate, why I still do that work. And that's kind of a little bit about how I got here.
And that's why you are here, because, I actually don't know of any other advocates who are giving a voice to this very important area in dance. And often dancers are seen as not having a voice, or not feeling like they have the power to say what they need or what they want. So it's really super important to have you and people like you, and hopefully you will inspire more people to do this kind of work, to provide that support for dancers, especially for their health and well-being, and especially now. Which kind of brings me to my next question about the kind of work or the kind of organizations you work with. And you gave me a big long list there. Maybe some of the work that you do there, and how this, how you're working with these organizations really to make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So OneDance UK is my sort of main role, and the National Institute forms a part of that work. And that OneDance UK sort of organization is quite unique, perhaps internationally, in that our role, we're funded by the government, our role is to support dance and the dance ecology. So everyone who dances in the UK is supported by us. And that, as I've mentioned, is a really broad group of people, not just sort of professional dancers and those in vocational training, but everyone who engages in that entire dance ecology. And so the work that I do within that organization is supporting the physical and mental health and well-being. So not just the absence of injuries, the absence of mental health issues, the absence of social problems, but indeed the opportunity to grow and be well physically, to be performing at your best, to be mentally well. So both health and well-being, but also performance. And I deeply believe that being healthy and being well supports performance. And the way that we do that work of supporting the health, well-being, and performance of the dance ecology is by providing education, resources, and clinical support. So you may already be aware that education is a really, really fundamental part of us being able to sort of change things. So if you don't know how to maybe make better choices, or if you don't know anything about where to find help, it makes it really difficult to make any change in terms of physical and mental health. So fundamentally, I do a lot of education work. So a lot of giving lectures, a lot of making resources, a lot of writing articles and blogs, but also quite a few conferences. And you can find our conference videos on our YouTube channel for OneDance UK, but we've done conferences on a wide range of subjects that are relevant to dancers. So nutrition and eating disorders, mental health, trying to make sure that dancers are fit and healthy from a conditioning and strength perspective, many different topic areas that often dancers or those in the dance ecology don't have time necessarily to learn about on their own. In terms of clinical support, we do quite a lot with both the National Health Service in the UK, as well as private healthcare practitioners. One of the things that we know is that people in the UK who engage in dance practice often say that they have trouble engaging with healthcare practitioners because they don't understand them. And so we work to try and help healthcare practitioners to understand the demands of participating in dance, particularly intensively. We also try to make sure that we provide healthcare support. So another thing that we've been hearing from people in the dance ecology in the UK is that healthcare is very expensive. And so, for example, if you twist your ankle, that could be 6 physiotherapy appointments, that could be up to £600. And for a freelance dance artist, that's a huge sum of their income in order to be able to come back to their training. So we provide a free healthcare service, which is dance specialist through the National Health Service. And we also provide discounted healthcare services to dancers from private practitioners. That healthcare service is constantly evolving. And one of the things that we also now have is a performance optimization package, which is screening for dancers. And that musculoskeletal screening helps dancers to get to know their bodies better. But the last thing, I think perhaps the thing that maybe sits as a foundation to both the clinical support and the education is research. So we have to use evidence to help us decide what dancers need. So some of the evidence we use is by talking to dancers, asking them what they need, having case studies, doing focus groups. But also sometimes it's about gathering evidence and gathering data. So sometimes it's about trying to carry out surveys or do research studies. And the National Institute of Dance Medicine and Science partners do a huge amount of research. And we've got a couple of key research projects as well that we are doing at the moment, specifically around mental health. So those 3 areas of clinical support, healthcare, or clinical support, education, and research are sort of the key things that we do to try and support the dance ecology's health and well-being in the UK.
And that's interesting, because I know the kind of work you do in research, you call it applied research. So maybe, can you tell us a little difference between maybe what you mean by just regular old research and applied research, and why is that relevant to our community?
Yeah, I suppose the reason that I talk about applied research is because regular old research, for anybody that's watching this webinar, I'd be really surprised if anybody who is not specifically a researcher or a medical professional has read a research paper. And that's part of the problem, is that research by its nature is for researchers. People write research papers for other researchers to read them and build the evidence base. That's not very helpful for a teacher or for a dance student or for a choreographer, because it's written in a technical language that often isn't very easy to understand for someone who hasn't studied it. And so that means that a lot of the innovation and knowledge that can come from research isn't translated into practice. And it's such a shame, because that information could really help to do things that could be beneficial for physical and mental health and for performance. The other piece of applied research goes the other direction. So I was just talking about research going into practice, but it's also really important that practice goes into research. So what are the concerns that dancers are experiencing? What are the issues that choreographers need help with? What is it that a dance manager could do to help support and promote the well-being of a dance company? All of those kinds of questions, they need to be relayed back to researchers and medical professionals. And so you have to create this bridge so that people can cross from one side to the other, and both directions of travel are available, so that people can meet, discuss, and come up with knowledge together. So that kind of knowledge translation or knowledge creation, that's the magic. And that is what I want to see. If I could make any change in the world, I'd love to see that change happen.
Yeah, and we've had this conversation before where we've talked about how often the dancers in the community, we're often the subjects or the participants in research. And often we don't know what the outcome of that research might be or how that might then benefit us in the future. And that's such an important process, is to kind of to feed back to the community, let them know that their voice is being heard and their concerns are being met, and that there is a possibility of doing something with that. And I know that's part of the work that you do, which is really wonderful, because again, I don't know many people who are working like that. But I'm just going to switch tacks a little bit. So I'm really curious to know a little bit more about how you facilitate and develop health and well-being programs within the dance industry. I mean, working with companies or working with individuals, or can you maybe give us an example of how that actually works?
Yeah. So I feel like I have quite a unique situation in the UK, which is that before I started in my job in 2010, there was 30 years of history behind me of integrating healthcare professionals, researchers, and dance professionals together in conversations about health and well-being. That, as a kind of history, provided us with what I would kind of call a community of practice and a sense of shared responsibility for dancers' health, well-being, and performance, but also for the ecology of dance being healthy and well. And I think the thing that has allowed that to kind of continue has been keeping those conversations open. And so I'd say that that's where facilitating programs for health and well-being within companies and schools begins, is having conversations. And I can't stress enough how important it is to allow that bridge to have two directions of travel, because there's a huge amount of wisdom that people who have worked in dance have or develop over time. So you can imagine that someone who has been teaching for 20 years, someone who has had a professional dance career, someone who has trained for 10 years, they all have a massive amount of wisdom about their own bodies, about training, about expression and performance quality, and they need to be able to share that wisdom with medical professionals and scientists who also have wisdom about other topics. And so by starting conversations with companies and schools, you start to ask questions about what's important to them, what they know, and what their problems are. And the next step in facilitating those health and well-being programs is providing resource. So a lot of times in companies and schools, there's limited resource, whether that's financial resource, time resource, or indeed kind of knowledge or specialist skill resource. So for example, you might talk to a company. The company would say, you know, we would love to have more help with preventing injuries, but we just don't have the time in our schedule to provide dancers with 6 weeks before we start rehearsing to build up their fitness. We understand that dancers need to be fitter to be kind of less likely to become injured. And often what dancers need to become fitter is that sort of preparation period of conditioning. But if you have a limited schedule or you have not very much money to rent a space to prepare dancers for a performance, they may not have that resource. So figuring out how to input some resource in there, whether that's, okay, we can find you a studio where you can train for a little while ahead of your rehearsal period, or we can provide you with the benefit of a strength and conditioning coach who can give your dancers some exercises they can do at home while they're preparing for this choreographic phase. We can give you some advice for how dancers can make sure that they stay fit during their break times or during their break holiday periods. All of that stuff is really important, and just inputting some resource can make all the difference. I think the last thing to consider in developing health and well-being programs with dance companies and schools is to think about how you make them stick. And I think that if you try and consider maybe the last time you thought about health and well-being, probably you went, oh, I learned a thing about health and well-being today. I learned I should drink more water to be healthier, or I learned I should sleep for 8 hours a night. I'll do that. I'm definitely going to do that. And then 2 weeks later, you've completely forgotten about it. It didn't stick. You didn't do anything. You didn't change anything. And making things sticky is what I hope to be able to do. So it's kind of about finding the motivation for why you want to make that healthcare change. So what is it about that healthcare change that's going to matter to you? So coming back to that example of the company that has the dancers who are trying to get less injured during that choreographic period. So perhaps the sticky thing for the company is they want to have less injured dancers. They want their dancers to get all the way through that creation period, all the way through the performances, being really fit and really strong and performing beautifully. But maybe for the dancers, the thing that's sticky is they want to look good on stage. They want to be fit. They want to be healthy. They don't want to be worried about whether or not they're going to get an injury. They just want to look good on stage. Or maybe they just want to make sure that they can get that paycheck at the end, right? You know, a lot of us are going from paycheck to paycheck as dancers. So you need to have that money coming in. So you need to be aware that you're not going to lose that money. But what is it? What is it that's going to make it sticky? And indeed, recognizing that not everything is going to be sticky for everyone. So it may be that that thing isn't super important to everybody, but that's okay. It's about trying to find out what people need and helping to kind of connect need with resource, connect need with knowledge.
I love that, sticky. I'm so going to borrow that from you, because you've put it in such a beautiful way that sometimes when we do these workshops, it's like a hit and run. So you have this great experience or a bad experience, and you take away something from it, but then you try and integrate that into your practice, and maybe it sticks or maybe it doesn't stick. So I mean, it's a wonderful, because I'm always thinking about how do we bring that experience back? How do we build on that experience? How do we get that, and as in your words, to be sticky? And it's wonderful to think about how to make that relevant to the dancers or relevant to the dance managers. And that's how it's going to stick. And that's kind of interesting, because it brings me to this point of how do you then work with dancers to develop health and well-being throughout their careers to maybe have more sustainable, high valued careers? I know that we have dancers who are dancing longer, which is great, but there are requirements to be able to do that. So what kind of work are you doing with this sustainability, longevity of dancers?
Yeah, and again, this is a place where I think I have a very unique perspective, because OneDance UK's work is across that ecology. And so we have the ability almost to see people travel through systems. So we see people start out doing a dance class for fun, maybe as a young person. We see them potentially move into intensive, maybe vocational training. We see them move into a professional career. We might even see them move into a second career in dance, a choreographer, a teacher, a manager, a producer. We may even see them retire from dance and move into an entirely different career. Now, that lifespan, that ecology that we see an individual move through, it tells us a lot about transitions. And transitions are really, really key to understand in health and well-being. How do you make the transition from your local sort of participation in dance to more intensive training? That might mean you have to move locations, you move away from your family, you're suddenly in an environment that's really, really intensive, a lot is being asked of you. That's a huge transition. Then how do you make the transition from vocational training into professional life? That's another massive transition. You don't have the safety of your training environment anymore. You may not know anyone. You may be worried that you're never going to make it as a professional. You may have an idea of what you thought you were going to do, but actually you do something completely different. That's a massive transition. And then I think the transition maybe that's a little bit more commonly talked about is the transition from a professional dancing career to a different career, whether that's in dance or outside of dance. I think there's some literature on that. There's a pretty good kind of understanding of some of the issues that might arise there. But understanding those transitions is very important. I think the other thing to recognize is that when we want a sustainable career, I'm not just talking about a career on stage. And that's sort of coming back to this idea of promoting health and well-being as well as performance. I often say to people I'm teaching, I really love that you're a dancer. I really love dance. I did dance. I care about it. I think it's important to our human development. I love the art form. I love artists. I love dancing. But at the end of the day, I don't care if you're the best dancer in the world, the worst dancer in the world, or somewhere in between. I don't care if after today you quit dancing and go do something else with your life. What I care about is that you as a human being reach your potential in the things that you want. And I think sometimes, perhaps too often in our environments, there is a pinnacle, which is being a professional dancer. And we start off our lives in dance thinking that's the pinnacle, and I'm going to reach that pinnacle. I'm going to be a professional dancer. And it's a false pinnacle. There are so many things that people can do in dance. And it's not that being a professional dancer is the best one. It's just one of them. And I think we think that once you've had a career as a professional dancer, that's all you're worth. And once you have transitioned out of that, or if you never make it to that, that you're lacking in worth somehow. I hate that sort of phrase that those who can't do teach. I think that's ridiculous. Actually, there are people who are called to teach, people who have something powerful and meaningful to offer to teaching and to many other professions. So thinking about kind of the development of the whole sustainable career, we are talking about human capacity, human capability. And I want to see people do their best work wherever they are in their lives, whatever they're doing in their lives. And they've chosen to kind of commit some of their time, some of their incredible, capable human capabilities to the dance ecology right now. And thank goodness, I'm so grateful to them, because we are so, so lucky to work in such an inspiring, beautiful field. So I guess it's about that. It's about helping everyone to reach their own potential.
And that's beautiful, because this whole webinar series about optimizing dancer potential, being the best that you can be. And I just love, every time I talk to you, Erin, I come away thinking, oh yeah, gosh, absolutely. That idea of transitions just resonates so much with me, because it's one of the things I know from psychotherapy is that transition periods for people are huge times of change, and they need support. And that's often when people reach out to a counselor or psychotherapist, is during those times of transition. And one of the things that you're doing during that time is just helping people recognize that that is actually what's going on for them. They have this time of change, and it's okay. It's okay to get lost. It's okay to be unsure. It's okay to not know what's going on, and to be comfortable in that not knowing, but also that you'll come out the other end and you'll be fine. So there's that kind of that transitional, that inspiring, that developmental process. So I'm going to write that one down next to sticky. Those are my two so far tonight. Now I'm just going to take a little pause here, and if anybody from our audience tonight has any questions for Erin, I'd really encourage you to pop them down in the chat box. And while we have Erin here, this is a great opportunity for you to ask your questions and for Erin to be able to answer them. And specifically for those people in our local community who may be interested in doing the sort of things that Erin is doing for us here in Hong Kong, and sort of developing our own health and well-being advocacy and support that way. And I guess if we go back, Erin, just for a moment, you're working in the, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I know that funding situations always change, but how is OneDance UK and NIDMS, how are they able to provide your services and this level of support to the community in the UK?
That's a really good question. So I'm sure in the ecology of government funding, you will be entirely aware that the government's priorities around what they want to fund at different times shifts. And I think the reason that we are able to do what we've been able to do has been about trying to kind of make the argument. So as I mentioned, OneDance UK is funded by the UK government. And there was a period of time sort of in 2011 where the government decided that they didn't want to fund our work at all anymore. So we went from being a fully funded organization to an organization that had no funding from one year to the next. And I don't think that's uncommon. I mean, certainly looking at Australia, that's been the case a lot with Australian dance organizations as well. But one of the things that it made me particularly aware of was that we need to be very, very clear about why we do what we do. And I think making the argument for the value of dance and the health and well-being of the humans who engage in dance, it requires you to be pretty convincing. And to be convincing to the government, you need statistics. And so I mentioned the value of evidence-based to try and make sure that practice is good, but evidence is also really valuable to make the argument for why you need funding for different things. And we're lucky now that we have government funding that supports our kind of core work, but we also are sort of regularly asking private donors, trusts, foundations for money as well. And one of the questions that we often have to answer is what are you going to do? How is my money going to change things? And I think one of the things that perhaps I'm getting better at talking about or being articulate in is the change I want to see. So your £1 will make this difference to this person. And I think speaking to communities that maybe don't necessarily value that or wouldn't necessarily put their money against it, there are arts donors all over the world who pay money to support artists, pay money to support the creation of art. And if you draw together the need to be well with the ability to create art, I think that's a really valuable argument to make. That if you want to support art, if you want to see great art on stage, then you need to make sure that you invest in the humans who make it. You need to make sure that those humans have what they need to make great art. So I think it's about kind of making that connection between the money that you need and the reason that you need it.
So that's interesting, because that again comes up to what other kind of challenges do you have or you facing in your work? I mean, obviously funding is a big one, but are there other challenges, resistances that you're encountering in the work that you're doing?
I'm smiling because there are so many challenges. I'll pick out two of the key ones. I think tradition and culture are potentially a place of challenge in dance, because the tradition and culture within some genre of dance or within some cultures, subcultures within our dance ecology can be somewhat resistant to change. And that resistance to change or kind of concern about change can lead people to be very sort of closed in the way that they approach training or professional careers. And that closeness or closure means that very little innovation happens. So if we take classical ballet for an example, classical ballet training looks very similar to what it did 100 years ago. The way that we train classical dancers is really quite similar to what we did 100 years ago. That's changing in some places who are willing to be open and to allow innovation, but it's still not the norm. And I think making an argument is good for funding bodies as much as it is for people who are making decisions about something like how you decide who's talented. So every ballet school, again, sticking with ballet here, has auditions. And someone sits at the front of the room and decides who's talented. Now, what are they looking for? What does talent mean to them? How do they decide who's going to be a professional dancer and who's not? Well, it's dictated probably by tradition, probably by some sense of intuition from them, probably by maybe some experiences that they've had, maybe themselves or training other dancers. But there's no real evidence base. There's no sense of definitely, well, that child is going to make it and that child isn't. And so they're kind of looking into a crystal ball and making decisions on not very much evidence. So trying to bring in other voices, other states of knowledge, building that bridge and having that two-way travel so that people can make good decisions, or at least discuss decisions and try and figure out what possibilities there might be to consider. That is a big challenge, just opening that conversation.
It sounds a lot of the work you're doing is about consciousness raising and bringing those conversations out into the open, maybe, where people can express their views or even disagree. But if we don't have those discussions, then we can't really move forward or find any way around any of these obstacles or challenges. Now, Tracy's just asked, can you share your experience and difficulties and challenges you face from transitioning from various roles in your lifetime? So professional dance to working in a more research-based role. And you can also, I know that you know so many professional dancers who have transitioned as well as yourself into those various roles. So maybe you can give us some perspectives from your own experience and maybe from some of those other people that you've been working with as well.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy, for that question. So I think perhaps there are a few things. So any transition is terrifying, and I will use that word. It's absolutely terrifying. And I think, Brenton, when you were saying about how helpful the discussion about transition is, I was just thinking, thank goodness for people like you who can kind of be there to be a guide through a transition process. And I guess for me, transition is like kind of walking through a forest in the middle of the night, blindfolded, not knowing where you're going. You don't know what the ground is going to be like. You don't know what the weather's going to be like. And having a psychotherapist, having a friend, having someone who's been through that transition to hold your hand and walk with you is so helpful, because you're absolutely terrified. And there's no way to kind of make that better. You can't sort of bring a flashlight with you. It's just dark and scary, and it will be until you reach the other side of the forest. So I guess for me, recognizing that terror, recognizing that it's going to be that way, and being calm about it and going, you know what, it's not going to be like this all the time. This is one short period. I guess the other really challenging thing for me about transitions is that I'm really anxious and really perfectionistic. And I find that, you know, I want everything to be just right, and I'm worried that it won't be. And so I've done a lot of work on myself to try and kind of allow for some of that anxiety, because I know that anxiety just means that I really care And I remind myself of that. I really care about this, and that's why I feel this way. That's why my heart is pounding. That's why I'm worried about this.
Yeah.
But also kind of being perfectionistic or being really kind of focused on wanting to do the best that I can has gotten me to where I am. And I need to kind of recognize the good parts about that, but also let go of some of the things where I might be kind of tempted to be really hard on myself if I don't think it goes perfectly. But specifically speaking to the transition between a career in dance from a practical perspective to a more research-focused career, practically, when you're working with your body all the time as a person who works practically in dance, when you start to be something else that is less physical, like a researcher, an educator, any person who sits at a desk, your body just hates you for a while. It's like, what are you doing to me? I hate this. And so for me, physical practice is really important. It keeps me sane. It keeps my body sane. The other kind of practical thing is relearning new skills. So many dancers have this experience. Many people who are practical people in dance have the experience of going, well, I've just spent 30 years of my life honing my skills to perfection as a performer, a choreographer, a teacher, whatever. And now I have to go and relearn new skills like a baby. Like, this is ridiculous. I hate this. I know that I'm skilled. But recognizing that what you learned in your life in dance will transfer over. You just have to find the place where it transfers. So I'm a really big believer in recognizing your own strengths. And good golly, is that hard? Like, what strengths do I have? If you just ask yourself that, what kinds of strengths do I have? What am I really, really good at? What's the thing that I'm better than anybody else at? I used to write those down specifically, especially in my master's degree when I was feeling like I was just failing at everything. Well, actually, you know what? I'm really good at observing. I'm really good at of hearing what people are saying and taking that in and remembering it. Terrible, absolutely terrible at loads of other stuff, but I'm really good at that. I'm also really good at kind of paying attention to the details of things. So I can remember things in great detail. I was great at statistics because I could remember the detail. I hate math. I'm terrible at math, but I could remember the detail of statistics. If you recognize your own skills, if you recognize your own strength, suddenly you're not starting from zero. You're not starting from nothing. And you kind of build your foundations on your existing strengths. So yeah, those are kind of some of the practical things. Having help, having a guide, knowing that it's going to be scary and accepting it, and recognizing your own strengths.
Yeah. And just the sharing of stories, just you sharing your story now or sharing your experience is a wonderful way for us all to feel connected. And I think that's super, super important. And often the transition stories of people, dancers going from dancer to choreographer or choreographer to teacher or dancer to teacher, these stories, we don't tell them so much, and there's no place for us to share those stories. I know that in vocational training, we often get people to come in and share their story with the students, but maybe we need more of that so that we know that there is light at the other end. And as you say, going through the forest is a very scary experience, but you will come out the other end, and you, because of all those wonderful skills you have as a dancer, will just find a new way of applying those in a new life. Now, I would love to hear a little bit about your PhD research, because I know you're doing a PhD at the moment. So how does that work with the applied research that you're doing, the PhD research, your work with different organizations? That's a lot to put together.
It is. It's a lot to put together. And I have to say, I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing it if you're working full time as I am. But it's actually been a really rewarding experience to be able to spend some time really looking at something I care about. So my PhD is looking at the development as well as the use or the deployment of psychological skills for dancers in training. So I'm really interested in the talent development process, as I'm sure you've probably heard from all of this conversation. But I'm also really interested in how we build skills. So I'm a big believer that the reason that we're successful is not because of some magical chance, although chance does play a role. I think we're successful because we develop skills and we utilize those skills. And just like riding a bicycle, you develop that skill and then you learn to ride a bicycle in the rain, or you learn to ride a bicycle up a hill, or you learn to ride a bicycle over rough terrain. You have to learn how to use those skills in different scenarios. And so my PhD has offered me the opportunity to really look in detail at that really sort of important period of training where we're learning loads. And anyone who's been through dance training will know that you learn a huge amount about your body, about dance technique, about musicality and expression, and all kinds of other things. But you don't necessarily think about what you learn in terms of psychological skills. So what do I learn about how to practice, how to focus, how to be resilient in the face of rejection or problems? If anyone has ever experienced an injury, you are resilient. I have news for you. If you've had an injury and you're here today, you are resilient. You can put that on a button on your t-shirt, you are resilient. Because every time we fall down, every time we make a mistake, every time we have a setback, we have the opportunity to grow. And that experience of falling down, that experience of having a setback helps us to grow, helps to make us stronger, helps us to make us more skilled. So my PhD sort of explores the process of that and the mechanisms that allow us to both learn skills, but also apply them in the context of dance. So if I know how to pick myself up when I've maybe slipped on the dance floor and fallen on my bum, can I then apply that skill in an audition environment or on stage? Picking yourself up, quite literally in this case, is a skill, and we need to learn to use it in different places at different times. And there's also a lot of blending of skills. So I'm drawing really heavily here from my PhD supervisor, Professor Dave Collins. He does a huge amount of brilliant work about psychological characteristics for developing excellence, or PCDEs. And his notion is that not only do you need to develop these psychological skills, but you also need to blend them. So it's kind of like cooking. Yeah, you know how when you have a grandmother, I have a grandmother, she's Mexican, she's delightful, she makes the most beautiful food. And I swear that her pots have something magical in them, that whatever she puts in them, it tastes good. But you have to blend, just like you blend spices, you blend food, you blend oils and chili, and you get a perfect dish. You have to be able to blend psychological skills, and you have to be able to put the right things into the pot to get out that excellent performance, that perfect experience that you're looking for. And blending takes practice. So it can take a long time for you to develop those skills. So my PhD looks at that. It's very much related, obviously, to the work that I do, because some of the work that I do in the dance ecology is about that training. So there are relationships, and it's lovely to be able to see in practice what's going on in the world and also study it, because PhDs are usually very academic. They're very kind of set away from real life almost. And so I love to be able to do the research, to do the academic stuff, but also to see the real life stuff and to kind of make sure that it happens in practice.
Wow, that's amazing. It's a great opportunity to be able to, as you say, doing applied work rather than just a theoretical work. And this is interesting because a lot of PhDs just go on people's shelves or go into the library or maybe turned into a couple of papers, but not necessarily in that really healthy or applied way. So that's great to hear you doing that. Now, we've got a few minutes left, and really what I'd like to do is just ask a couple more questions around if you're building a community-based or an industry-led dancer health and well-being program, what do you think are the key components?
Yeah. The first place to start is with I guess, community building. And what I mean by that is that we as human beings need to be able to connect with each other to determine what our goals are within any pursuit. And if we're talking about health and wellness programs, it's useful to build a community. So get people together, start to talk about the issues that they're facing, start to talk about what's important. So if you care about this topic and you're watching this webinar, talk to somebody else who cares about this topic. Bring people together and start to talk about these issues. And by having those conversations, by bringing together that community, you are stronger. Your one voice is one voice, and it's powerful on its own, but it's more powerful with people together. I don't know if you've ever heard this proverb, but if you want to go somewhere fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And we want to go far. We want to make big changes to support the well-being and health of the ecology of dance. So we need to do that together. So that's the first step, bring people together. The second step is identify goals and be realistic about those goals. So what do you want to achieve? What do you as a group want to achieve this year, next year, in 5 years, in 10 years? And it doesn't need to be, really complex. It doesn't need to be brand new. It might just be, we really want to have maybe a list of people that we know we can go to who can give us advice about injuries. Or maybe we just want to have a space to meet up and talk about these issues and be together with each other and to be able to correspond with each other. They don't need to be world changing, but set some goals. That's the second thing. The third thing, and this is going to sound really silly after what I've just said, meet your goals. Yeah. So if you set a goal and you say, this is what we want to do, get serious about meeting that goal and do what you need to do to get that done. Doesn't matter if you set a deadline and it goes whooshing by. There's a really great quote that I love where someone has said, I love setting deadlines because I love the sound of them whooshing by when they pass. It's okay if you don't meet the deadline, but meet the goal and then build on that goal. Celebrate the meeting of that goal, recognize it, feel proud of it, and then build on it. Because I think sometimes we're very focused on what we're doing. We're climbing a mountain and we're looking at the top and we don't see how far we've climbed. So recognize how far you've climbed and keep climbing and set those goals and meet them. So I suppose those are the 3 things that I'd recommend.
Wow, great. And we have a few minutes left and we actually have 2 questions. So I'm going to go to question number 1. Kim, I have a question about the connection of mental health and the dancer's ability to perform. So I'm assuming the question is, what is the connection between mental health or mental wellness and a dancer's ability to perform?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And thank you, Aaron Kim, for asking it. And the answer to that question is that there's no evidence base in dance. There's nothing that says that there's a connection between being mentally healthy and performing well. However, there is a pretty good connection that we can start to borrow from other areas of physical activity. So namely in sport, we have evidence to suggest something called thriving can happen with people who are engaging in physical activity, which is intensely challenging. So elite athletes can do something called thriving, where they have mental well-being, social well-being, and physical well-being alongside high performance or really, really strong athletic performances. And part of my PhD is about developing an evidence base that if we create the same thriving environment of well-being and performance in dance, we will be able to see the connections between well-being and performance. But unfortunately, there's no evidence of that yet. But for the moment, I would actually kind of point to your personal experience. How do you feel when you are performing at your best? Is that well? Is that not well? And indeed, the opposite. if you're thinking about the last time that you felt not very well, did you feel that you were able to perform at your best? And the answer is likely no, but I'm going to draw attention to the fact that there are often times that you might be tired, that you might not be feeling your best, but you pull out a great performance. And I think trying to recognize that there is a middle ground, that you have to be functional in your performance, that it's not just about being perfectly well and everything is perfect and you slept well and you ate well and you did everything perfectly to look after your health. No, nobody is perfect. And coming back to that idea of stickiness, no one is ever going to get it all right. But what you need to recognize is what you need to get your best. So what do you need to do for yourself? What do you need to do to prepare, to look after your body, to look after your mind, to work at your best and have the best performances? And that, I guess, is the sort of the connection that I would make before we have that evidence base.
Great. And another question, last question from Austin. Are there any standout gaps in the research or literature that you believe, if explored, could help professional and vocational dancers, and funding for organizations like OneDance UK?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Austin. That's a really good one. Because dance medicine and science is a really new field, there are loads of gaps. And I'd say that the gaps that are perhaps most important right now are the ones that are in the news. And so at the moment, there's quite a lot of information in the news about dancers and abuse prevention. So I think that that's a really important one for us in the UK, making sure that dancers have psychological safety and working conditions that allow them to work at their best. But indeed, there are loads of gaps. And that's why I think this is such an exciting field, because there's so much that we can do to make a difference.
Erin, that has brought us perfectly to the end of our webinar tonight. And I want to thank you so much for sharing your experience and your stories with us. I think it's the sharing of these stories which really help us as a community develop, to grow, to learn new ways of doing things, to open up new conversations, and to head in new directions. So I want to thank Erin, and I want to thank all our attendees tonight. And if you do have any questions or you'd like to follow up with Erin, I'm sure that Erin would be more than happy to answer any questions after. She hasn't agreed to this at all. I'm just throwing this to her. I'm sure that Erin would be happy to answer any of your questions. So if anybody does have any questions, then I think probably the best thing to do would be to
email me.
Erin, are you happy to put your email address in the? So Erin's going to pop her email address in there for those of you who are interested in asking more questions. I'm sure you have more questions. I always have questions, and I always have such a wonderful time with you, Erin. And I'm going away with sticky and transitions, and those are going to be my words for the rest of the week. So thank you, Erin. Thank you, everybody. Good night, and we're looking forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time. For Optimizing Dancer Potential number 7. So we'll see you then. Good night.
Thank you.